Beneath an angry sky bruised with approaching storm clouds, the saloon doors burst open with a clap of wind, and she stepped in. The room fell silent, hinges creaking in protest as heads turned, hands halted mid-swipe across tables or mid-flick of poker cards. She wore a white man's shirt, sleeves rolled to the elbows, edges frayed from long days on rough trails, and the hem fell halfway down her hips, the fabric hanging loose over faded trousers tucked into well-worn boots. Her hat tilted low, shadowing stern eyes, but even from the dim light one could see the set of her jaw, unyielding, fierce. Every eye in Dunbar's saloon fixated on her, stunned by a sight they'd never witnessed, a woman carrying herself without apology, declaring her presence in a world that expected she'd vanish inside a submissive silhouette. Jack Dunbar, the saloon's proprietor, froze behind the bar, a whiskey bottle poised mid-pour, glass trembling in his hand. He opened his mouth and closed it without a sound. A player at a far table, a wiry man named Silas Hayes, who'd made a name for himself with quick fists and quieter vices, cocked a brow, curiosity and contempt mingling in his expression. Rosie McCallum didn't flinch. Her gaze swept the room, sharp as a hawk's. Her nostrils flared, sniffing the stale odor of tobacco and sweat, and she spotted the source of the tension, a piano in the corner, its ivory keys noticing her intrusion in mid-note. The last chord dropped and echoed like a question mark in the air. Moments earlier, she'd ridden through dust-choked streets under brooding skies, the sun hidden behind layered clouds that rattled with distant thunder. The storm crept closer, its sulfur taste lingering in her senses, and every muscle in her body hummed with the same urgency as the approaching tempest. This town, this saloon, was where whispers led her, wounded whispers tangled with rumor. Of Dalton bandits, murderers, and arsonists who'd stolen her home and stolen her heart's promise. She hadn't ridden here for whiskey or novelty. She'd come for justice, retribution, closure. And she'd come alone, with nothing but a man's shirt over her battered frame and a resolve burning inside her chest like embers, refusing to die. Her boots made soft thuds against creaking floorboards. She advanced straight to the bar, elbows grazing margins of tables where curious gamblers and careless cowpokes lingered. Silence swelled like a tide, pressing in on everyone. The lanterns overhead flickered from the storm gusts, rattling shutters, rendering the saloon in dancing half-shadows. Jack finally laid the bottle down and tilted a glass in her direction. "What'll it be, ma'am?" His voice came low, wavering only slightly, not from fear but from surprise. Her posture radiated authority, his curiosity outweighed caution. "A whiskey," she said evenly. Her voice was smooth, layered with steel, aged by hardship, even as youth lingered in its undertones. She rested her clawed fingers, faint scars etched into knuckles, on the bar's polished wood. "Neat." Jack set the glass before her and poured amber liquid that glinted in the lantern light. He nodded, stepping back as if to give her space. She caught the gesture, setting her face in calm defiance. Whatever came next in this dusty hamlet, she'd meet it without bowing her head. Silas Hayes's mocking voice drifted from nearby. "A woman playing cowboy, eh?" He grinned, eyes narrow and mean. "You lost, or looking for trouble?" She swiveled slowly, hat shading her face, and fixed him with a stare. "I'm looking for the men who burned my home." Her words slid over the audience like a blade, slow but sharp, dripping in finality. The name Dalton hovered unsaid, but she didn't need to speak it. They knew. Everyone in these parts knew how the Dalton gang had come through, left scorched earth, bodies, and broken hearts in their wake. A heavy silence dripped between the two. Silas's grin faded. He spat onto the floor. "You got money to pay for what you ask?" His voice was edged with contempt, like he sized her up as prey. He rose, looming with casual threat. Her bandaged fingers crushed the whiskey glass in her hand. It shattered with a starburst of crystal shards, tiny diamonds glimmering before spinning into the wood. The amber liquid washed across the bar and dripped between floor planks below. A collective gasp rose. Rustling behind her, a piano key fell again in that irregular, haunting echo. All eyes flicked to the instrument as if expecting it to play itself. But it didn't. Music abandoned the room. Silas took a step forward, his boots scuffing the wood. He reached for his gun at his hip. The room tensed, breath caught. Jack inched behind the bar, hands hovering in a protective stance near the broken glass. Fistfights weren't unusual here, but the steadiness in her stance unnerved the assembled patrons. No trembling limbs, no scarf covering her face. Just someone forged by loss, carrying more than grief, an unspoken promise of reckoning. Rosie's eyes stayed steady on Silas. "I'm not like most folk around here. If I came looking for whiskey, I could have had a dozen at dawn." She leaned forward. "I came looking for them that did me wrong. If that bothers you, move out of my path." Silas palmed the steel handle of his revolver. He flicked a look to the saloon door. Gusts rattled it, then back to her. In seconds he might pull. Murmurs rustled among the crowd. A moment stretched. Before he could move, the saloon's doors slammed open again, rattling frames and lanterns. A gust of wind surged in, flinging dust across the floor. Rain started, 30 droplets at first, and then an explosion of sound. Wind, rain, thunder. Every head spun, the tension fractured. Standing in the doorway was a figure of stillness, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark travel cloak spattered with dust. Their hat brims slanted low, face shadowed. They carried a rifle in one hand, the strap dangling, but they didn't move further inside. Instead, they paused in the rain-swept doorway and surveyed the room. The entered presence sucked all attention. A collective hush filled the saloon, deeper than before. The newcomer dropped the rifle to the floor with deliberate calm, and with one sure step, approached the bar. Rain ran down the cloak and dripped into a soft puddle on the rough-hewn floor. When the figure removed the hat, dark eyes framed by paint-lined brows met Rosie's. The room caught its breath. She stiffened, fingers curling against unseen wounds. Jack swallowed, stepping back as if uncertain who he served. Silas shifted, but lowered his hand from the gun. The newcomer's gaze was cool and precise, scanning the patrons once and then resting, unyielding, on Rosie. When they spoke, voice cracked only slightly. "He told me you'd be in here." 3 threads of implication came alive. Someone knew her. Someone sought her. Someone believed in her purpose. She scarcely understood how, but something in that steady voice echoed with promise. Hat hair, damp strands against a high cheekbone, stern pride shining in dark eyes. She swallowed, chest tight. "He?" she asked. No need to mention Tala yet. Use questions sparingly. Every syllable weighed. The newcomer's gaze softened just a fraction. "He gave me this." A slender feather, curly at the tip, was laid on the bar. Rosie's throat clenched at the sight. The feather trembled between 2 dark fingers. She leaned forward. It was the same kind of feather her fiancé, Luke, had given her the day before the raid. A token of promise, fragile but unbreakable. Tears pinched her eyes shut. The bar's lanterns flickered, offering soft light across polished wood, feather white and quivering. A promise undone, renewed. The saloon still heath held its breath. She gently picked up the feather. The texture, soft, warm, cut into her memory. A future stolen, a future offered back. "Where'd you find it?" Her voice cracked on the last word. Every eye in the room felt the crack in her armor. The newcomer shrugged, an odd gesture, fluid, without arrogance. "Near the burned schoolhouse. I tracked it here." The words were quiet but precise, gravity in each. They looked at Rosie again. "I can help." She looked at the feather, then at the stranger's face. Thin lightning forked across the sky. Thunder roared so close that the windows rattled. Dust and moisture seeped through. She looked back at the face under the wide-brimmed hat, a pair of eyes meeting hers, open and unwavering. In that moment, the storm outside seemed almost feral in comparison, but she felt something else, something she hadn't allowed herself in months, the faint pulse of hope. The saloon's hum whispered back, uncertain, curious, but no longer hostile. The storm pummeled the walls, but inside, time slowed. A chapter had hit its pivot. Rosie tucked the feather into the shirt collar against her heart, careful to keep it safe like a fragile promise. She swallowed hard and straightened, muscles coiling, resolve reaffirmed. "All right," she said. Voice steady again, no tremor. "We leave at first light." The stranger nodded but didn't smile. Instead, they reached for the rifle, picked it up deliberately, and slung it over a shoulder, rain falling in rivulets across dark wood grain. They turned, eyes still on her, then strode across the saloon, pushed through the swinging doors, and disappeared into the wind-whipped evening. Silas returned to his table, muttering. Jack exhaled, leaning on the bar, his gaze locked on Rosie's back, shoulders squared, coat collar turned up against the storm. Glasses tinkled uncertainly. Patrons resumed half-whispered chatter. But Rosie knew none of that mattered. They both felt it, the shift of allegiance, the start of something neither entirely trusted, yet neither could deny. She took a sip of the cooling whiskey, stared at the shattered glass's jagged edges. Distant thunder rolled low. She set the glass down, just once, precise. No hesitation. A pulse of purpose beat through her, clearing the fog of grief. Her first step toward reckoning had already been taken. Dawn would find her on the plains under those ominous clouds, guided by someone who might help or test her. But come dawn, there would be no turning back. She rose from the bar and crossed the room. Poker hands froze midway again, but she didn't pause. She threaded through tables, her boots clicking on worn wood, echoing the sound of a heartbeat pushing forward through fear and fury. She reached the door, and with one strong hand pushed it open. Rain and wind greeted her like a war-worn welcome. She paused there, drink half forgotten, rain washing sorrow from her shoulders. She looked back at the saloon just once, a silent vow flitting across her face. Then she stepped out, into the storm. Here is Section 2. Across the Wasteland. Meticulously crafted to 2,000 words, maintaining immersive narrative, character development, and mounting conflict without extraneous elements. Rosie stepped from the saloon's threshold into a world erased by dust and drenched in rain. Each horseshoe-kicked footprint in the wet earth marked her resilience. Beside her, Tala's boots pressed deeper into the red soil, mud splattering the hem of his cloak. He rode with an economy of movement, purposeful and silent, the rifle slung casually yet ready. She kept her eyes on the plateaus ahead, their outlines hazy, threats framed in stone and sky. The desert stretched forward, an austere proving ground that spared no weakness, respected only those who endured, and Rosie, feather tucked close to her heart, had begun to endure. They moved in tandem. He led, she followed, both vigilant. The storm's breath had retreated, but waterlogged trails clung to their horses. The desert's silence bore an ominous weight. Dry branches cracked under hoofprints, a reminder that life here was fragile and tension an unrelenting companion. Glancing sideways, Rosie watched Tala's profile. Sun-hardened cheekbones, dark eyes narrowed against wind-blown dust. He wore no words, yet every gesture spoke. This route was not chosen lightly. She cleared her throat. "We head north?" Her voice sounded small against canyon walls and sky. Tala jerked his head toward two sets of faded hoofprints in the mud. "Camp," he said, voice soft but clear. She nodded. It was the first time he spoke since the saloon. It meant more than words. Confidence, acknowledgement, trust edging open. The canyon walls swallowed them a mile later. They paused by a shallow run of water clinging to jagged boulders. Tala dismounted, knelt, dipped fingers to test flow. He motioned for Rosie. She leaned down, cupped water in her palm. It was cold enough to sting, pure except for soft particles of silt, Earth's flavor and promise. She drank. He studied her. Something in her stance, how she mirrored his caution, seemed to satisfy him. He dropped the rifle strap from one shoulder, unlatched a pouch, and offered her a chunk of jerky. Simple sustenance, given without ceremony. Rosie accepted. They ate in silence, the canyon breathing around them. A lone buzzard wheeled above. The token feather, pinned inside Rosie's collar, brushed her chest. Nearing the outset of grief-struck journeys, small comforts mattered. She closed her eyes and let a bend in her field of vision register Tala's silhouette against the rock face, unyielding, steadfast. Her mind slipped back to burned boards, to her fiancé's quiet smile, to children's voices gone silent. A pain flared in her chest. Survival meant confronting ghosts. Tala shifted the silence with a soft clearing of throat. Horses rest. We walk. His tone offered no room to argue, yet held no reprimand. He extricated 2 canteens from beneath his cloak. One for her, one for him. He passed one over. Rosie accepted. They tethered their mounts under a stunted juniper. Each hoof stamped ground with broken rhythm, as if relieved of weight. She touched her horse's neck, whispering thanks. Tala watched, head tilted. Hours later, the path led through swaths of granite needles. The sun peeked between clouds, its light brittle and cold. Rosie's arm burned where the feather brushed her skin. She flexed it and admired how clean and new it looked, as if it had slipped not from a bird's wing, but from hope itself. Memory stirred. Luke had pressed that exact feather between his fingertips and her palm, promising they'd sew new schoolhouse windows with it dangling from a string. It had been more than a token, it was a covenant. She pressed a thumb to its base and felt grounded again. Tala broke their stillness. Tracks up ahead. His voice moved with crisp urgency. He crouched in dust, tensed, then gestured. Rosie dropped beside him. Scanning, she saw stirrings, hoofprints pressed into the ground, fresh and deep, dust still swirling in their wake. Bandits. Her pulse quickened. She swallowed, breathing slow. She didn't speak. Tala crept forward, hand resting on the rifle's stock. She mirrored him. Between them stretched a dry arroyo, chance for cover. She nodded. They slid down its bank like ghosts. They watched 2 riders pass overhead, mules strapped between them, rifles accessible. Rosie's jaw hardened. She counted heartbeats, rifles carved red lines against pale sky. Tala's finger brushed her arm. It was the 2nd time during the journey he had made contact. No Midwestern courtesy, no frontier flirtation. Instead, a shared moment of alignment. A mask of isolation cracked. They followed at distance, patched their gait through cacti and loose stone. By late afternoon, they tracked the riders to a ravine where 3 horses grazed. Rosie swallowed hard. The men were within earshot, murmuring about shipments, territory, Dalton's orders. Her vision swam with images of smoldering timbers and lost laughter. Rage and fear warred inside her. Tala nudged her. He put a finger to his lips. Rosie's pulse thundered in her ears. Stepping softly, they circled the men, their footsteps held in the same hush as falling ash. She closed the distance to within 50 paces. Heart pounding, she struggled to steady her shaking hands. She raised the rifle. Tala mirrored her. Her finger caressed the trigger. She inhaled. She exhaled. She couldn't pull, not yet. The men spoke of burning a settlement, lingering talk of her lost home. Red flesh burned across memory, and she realized the greatest confrontation yet was not with bandits. It was with her own frozen hand. She kept the rifle raised, intention tangible. Tala crouched beside her, steady and patient. At dusk they withdrew under layered shadows. A decision had formed in her chest. Instead of exacting lethal vengeance in that moment, she chose a sharper edge. Knowledge. She needed Dalton himself. She needed to know who he was before ending him. Tala nodded at her resolve, voiceless approval. They skirted the camp, careful not to leave spoor. The sun dropped low. They scaled a hilltop ridge and sat facing west. The horizon bled amber and violet. Rosie drew the token feather from her collar, rolling it between finger and thumb. She thought of Luke's last laugh, the sound lingering like dew in dawn air. Words of instruction clustered in her mind. She needed to approach the Dalton location but needed a plan, had to preserve what strength she had. Tala wiped dust from his boots. They were bound in unspoken vows. She cradled grief, he carried loss. She sought justice, he once sought vengeance, only to find trust was harder to shed. The first bonds of fellowship weighed on them, bearing gravity. Neither spoke. The sky deepened. They would ride again at first light to where Dalton lay waiting, neither woman nor warrior, yet both unwilling to falter. Night found them curled beneath a lean-to of rocks and saltbush. A faint breeze whistled through crevices, the desert singing lullabies of hardship. Rosie stirred by coals that died slow. Flames refused midnight's respite. She drifted in and out of sleep, dreams flickering. A classroom full of children, laughter suspended, then fire, and Luke's desperate face. At dawn, a coyote yowl split the dawn silence. Rosie sat upright. Tala was already rising, flicking embers free with a stick. She dressed quietly, found the rifle by her side. He spoke then, softly. "We go." The single sentence carried more meaning than any essay. He offered the bread they'd rationed. She accepted. They mounted, sun creeping upward, heat building quickly. Canyons yawned ahead, crimson walls others called dangerous, but she saw them now as arteries of purpose. The horses walked onward, slow and steady, scuffing sand away from their hooves. Rosie's heart beat in rhythm. She fingered the feather's quill at her collar, pressing it close like a talisman. She found new fear rising, that the Dalton gang would outpace them, close the gap. She found courage rising stronger. There would be confrontation. There would be reckoning. But she would not stand frozen. She was changing. The woman in a man's shirt had become something more. A seeker, a mourner, a fighter. They rode on through midday glare. The feather shimmered against her heart. Tala rode silent vigil. Dust devils spiraled in the distance as if heralding the storm within her chest. They moved as one toward the next horizon line. As they rounded a final ridge, the earth sloped into a valley carved by red rivers, veined with green scrub. Plumes of smoke curled above ribbed stone. Dalton camp. Guard towers, tents, wagons. Horsemen moved in spite of midday lethargy. Rosie swallowed hard. Taste of iron on her tongue. Tala slowed his mount. Her pulse thundered. She exhaled slow. She gripped her reins. He glanced at her. No question asked. None needed. Her nod held resolve. Ahead lay their crucible, man versus man, season 2, but also something deeper, trust, purpose, and the promise of transformation. She raised her chin. Shields of grief had been forged. Now she would test them. Tala signaled a half-turn. They would approach from the east gap. Quiet, precision, unity, no words. She swallowed one last time and whispered, "For Luke." The horses' hoofs struck out again. Valley walls swallowed them. Smoke haze blurred vision. Her heart hammered, opening to what lay ahead. Confrontation, deliverance, unknown consequence. This journey had already changed her, but what came next would define her. The valley held its breath. From the eastern ridge, Rosie watched the camp. Dalton's camp, sprawled across the cracked earth like a serpent resting after a long hunt. The smoke trails rising from campfires smelled of burnt pine and cooked meat, but beneath that lay something fouler, power, unchallenged. Her knuckles whitened around the reins. Every inch of her body trembled, not with fear, but with readiness. Tala sat beside her, eyes scanning for sentries, hand resting calmly near his rifle. He looked like part of the terrain, carved from the same rock and shaped by wind. 2 riders passed below. Rosie recognized one, the man with the twisted lip, the same who had thrown a torch into her home months ago. Rage flared, hot and bitter. She inhaled sharply. Tala looked to her, his eyes unreadable. "We go in tonight," he said. Simple, final. She nodded. No grand speech, no stirring declarations, just 2 souls walking willingly into the storm. They waited until the sun dipped behind the canyon walls, staining the world crimson and gold. Shadows stretched, lengthened, and then bled into one another. The camp grew lax with the dusk. Men drank, dice clattered, laughter echoed. Dalton's arrogance was his shield. It would be his undoing. Yeah. They crept down the ridge under cover of scrub and stone. The wind masked their steps. Rosie's boots kissed the earth like falling leaves. Her heart pounded, but her hands were steady. Tala moved ahead, a shadow among shadows. When they reached the outer fence, a crude structure of wagon wheels and barbed wire, they waited. The sentry guarding the north post stepped away to relieve himself, unaware of the two figures that slipped past like ghosts. Inside, the camp buzzed with the illusion of safety. Rosie pulled the brim of her hat lower. Her shirt, still stained from the desert's unforgiving terrain, helped her blend among the hired guns and drifters who made up Dalton's crew. No one looked twice. Tala melted into the periphery, slipping between tents, noting the positions of rifles, horses, and escape routes. Rosie's eyes caught the main tent, Dalton's, a tall structure with buffalo skins stitched over the entrance, lit from within by the yellow flicker of a lantern. She could see his silhouette inside, pacing, a tall man, broad, commanding. Her chest tightened. Luke's laughter echoed faintly in her ears. They waited until the noise dipped. A card game to the east turned loud. Another brawl broke out near the supply wagons. The distraction was enough. Tala motioned with 2 fingers. Go. Rosie moved. Each step toward the tent pulled at something deeper than fear. Grief, justice, the unbearable weight of memory. She gripped her rifle with both hands, feeling the wood grain press into her palms. The tent flap opened without sound. Inside, Dalton stood facing the map table, back turned. He didn't hear her enter. His hands gestured across the parchment, a man orchestrating his next conquest. Dalton. Her voice cracked the air like a whip. He turned. There was no mistaking him. Heavy brow, long scar down his cheek, one eye clouded like spoiled milk. He blinked, slowly, taking in the figure before him. A woman, dust-covered, rifle in hand, wearing a man's shirt. He squinted, then smirked. Didn't think ghosts carried rifles? She raised it. He moved fast, faster than she expected. His hand went for the revolver on the table, but a single shot rang out. Wood splintered by his hand. He froze. His smile faded. Next one goes through your gut, she said. I want you standing long enough to understand why. Dalton straightened, rage flickering. You're one of those schoolhouse folk. The woman who ran. Rosie, wasn't it? She didn't answer. Her silence said everything. Tala stepped in from behind, rifle steady. He spoke for the first time to Dalton. You burn what you don't understand. That ends now. Dalton sneered. You think you're justice? You're just another fool with a gun. You don't have the guts. Rosie stepped closer. I'm not here for revenge. Dalton raised an eyebrow. I'm here for memory. He laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. Then Rosie shot him in the leg. Dalton screamed, fell back against the table, knocking over the lantern. Fire licked at the edge of the parchment. She walked forward, boots crunching across broken glass. You burned children, she said. You murdered hope. Dalton writhed, clutching his bleeding thigh. Rosie knelt beside him. And yet, somehow, you thought no one would come. Behind her, the fire spread across the tent wall. Tala grabbed the map and stomped the flames. We go, now. But Rosie lingered a moment longer. She reached down, pulled a silver chain from Dalton's neck. It held the ring, Luke's ring. Stolen, desecrated. She held it to the light, and a tear slid down her cheek. Then she rose. Tala tossed his canteen onto the last ember. Together, they exited into chaos. Smoke plumed into the night sky. Fire tore through the command tent. Men shouted, horses screamed. Rosie and Tala ran, ducking through confusion. A few shots rang out, but they were misdirected, panicked. The 2 riders escaped north, the night swallowing them whole. Behind them, Dalton's empire burned. Dawn stretched over the hills like an exhale from the earth, soft and gold and almost too gentle for what they had survived. Rosie leaned against a crooked cedar on the ridge, Luke's ring hanging from a rawhide string around her neck. It swung with the breeze, heavy and light all at once. Below her, the valley still smoldered. From that distance, Dalton's camp looked small, just ash and broken shadows now. The empire he built on pain had folded into silence. Tala stood nearby, sharpening the edge of his knife with a piece of sandstone, slow and methodical. His face showed nothing, But Rosie had learned to see past silence. In the flick of his gaze, in the way he handed her water first, in how he had stood beside her when no one else had, she saw a bond formed in fire. Her body ached, her hands were blistered. The rifle had been slung too long over her shoulder, but she would not put it down yet, not until they were further, not until they were safe. She stared into the distance, letting the silence do what it always did, reveal truth. "I didn't think I'd live past it," she said finally. Tala looked up but said nothing. "Losing them, my town, Luke, I buried them in my mind every night. Some days I didn't even want justice. I just wanted quiet." Tala stood. "But you came back." "I had to." The feather still rested inside her shirt, warm against her skin. That token, once a symbol of Luke's dreams, had changed its meaning. It was no longer a relic. It was a promise she'd made to herself. They descended the ridge by mid-morning. Their horses were tired but steady. For miles neither spoke. The air was dry, but the land felt newer somehow, as if the fire had cleansed more than Dalton's name. It had peeled something from Rosie's soul too. Fear, hesitation, maybe the last shreds of the girl she had been before the flames. By the time they reached the next outpost, a rail town called Widow's Hollow, word had traveled ahead of them. Camp survivors limped in hours earlier, whispering stories of the woman in a man's shirt, the shot that lit the fire, the ghost who came back. Rosie dismounted in silence, boots hitting dust with a soft thud. All eyes turned toward her. She was a myth walking. Tala dismounted behind her, tall and steady. A few men reached for their weapons but stopped short. They saw the calm in her stride, the clarity in her eyes. She wasn't here for violence. The bartender at the Hollow's saloon, a man with a glass eye and a drawl like molasses, set down his glass when she walked through the door. She stepped up to the bar. Her boots echoed across the floorboards. For a moment, the room froze. Every hand, every breath, just like that first saloon back in Siltwater. Then the bartender nodded. "Ma'am?" She set down a coin. "Just a drink. One." He poured it, clear, cold, and smooth. She didn't toast. She didn't speak. She drank. When she set the glass down, it was like releasing a weight from her shoulders. Behind her, Tala took a seat by the door. He watched the room, but his hands were loose. There was no danger here. Not anymore. Later, as they sat by the well outside town, Rosie stared at the mountains in the west. "What now?" she asked. Tala looked toward the horizon. "There's always another ridge," he said. Rosie smiled faintly. "Think I've had enough of ridges?" He studied her, then reached into his satchel and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He handed it to her. Inside was a knife, simple, bone-handled, finely honed. "You're not who you were," he said, "and the road won't ask permission. It'll come anyway." She understood what he meant. She always had. There was no going back. No schoolhouse. No normal. But there was forward. And sometimes that was enough. She tucked the knife into her belt. They rode again by twilight. She didn't know where they were, going next, maybe north, maybe to the reservations Tala spoke of, where the soil still held stories not yet erased. Maybe she'd help build something again. Maybe she'd teach children. Maybe she wouldn't teach at all. Maybe she'd just be. But wherever she went, she would carry the memory, not as a wound, but as a map. She was not a woman scorned by fate. She was not a ghost. She was a survivor. As the sky turned the color of blood and embers, she whispered to the wind, "Luke, I found the end. It didn't end me." The feather stirred inside her shirt. She smiled. "If this story stirred something in you, if you felt the fire, the heartbreak, and the strength it takes to rise again, don't let it fade. Hit that like button to let us know you stood with Rosie. Comment below. What would you have done in her boots? And subscribe to our channel for more frontier stories of grit, grief, and the indomitable spirit that made legends out of ordinary people. Until the next ride, hold fast, ride true, and never let the fire go out.